All right, and welcome in on your Sunday afternoon, a special edition of 1075 The Game. What started on Wednesday with 16 teams has now been dwindled down to two. The top two, Texas and South Carolina, get set to square off in the SEC Women's Tournament Championship Final coming up today at 3 o'clock, which you can listen to right here on The Game. I'm Tyler Head, joining you live from the Herndon Chevrolet Studios in downtown Columbia. Elijah Campbell, the man on the scene up in Greenville at Bon Secours Wellness Arena, getting set for the rubber match between the Gamecocks and the Longhorns, fighting for the coveted crown of SEC tournament champion. You've been out there all weekend long, Elijah. What are the vibes in Greenville on this exciting day?
It wasn't like a delaying of the inevitable type feeling. I think there was some belief that LSU maybe could get past Texas if they held them to a rock fight, and they kind of did. But I think this is kind of the highly anticipated final that everybody was waiting to see. And I mean, especially considering what we had to do to get here, in terms of the coin toss and that being televised and that being a big ordeal in itself, but also you look at these two teams as the two teams in the league that have legitimate number one overall seed resumes. So there's so much on the line as opposed to just an SEC championship. There is the number one overall seed at stake too. I truly believe the winner of this game will be the number one overall seed going into the NCAA tournament. The vibes right now, there's a lot of anticipation. Texas, in terms of fan support, a lot better of a showing than I would have expected. They travel well. They have a large alumni base. Many of them are not too far from here. But this is a culmination of all the excitement that's been building up over the week.
Well, and these are two coaches and two programs that are not too unfamiliar with going to conference championship games. And Dawn Staley getting set for her sixth straight appearance in the SEC Women's Tournament Final. She spoke about that yesterday after defeating Oklahoma in the semifinals.
I mean, I would say those earlier years are what keeps us motivated to continue to win, because we lost a whole lot in those first 3 or 4 years, lost a lot. And I do believe you gain by losing sometimes, and it helps you sharpen your skills and sharpen who you want to be in this league. And I'm just proud that I got a chance to coach some really talented individuals and some great human beings that, it doesn't always end in you winning and being successful. But for us, we got the best of both worlds. So honored to represent this conference.
Again, they've been here before. They've done this. They've won the past two. Obviously, lost to Kentucky a couple years ago before going on to win the national championship. After that, and on the other side of things, you have Vic Schaefer and the Texas Longhorns, first year in the league, but obviously one of the best teams in the entire country. His fifth appearance in this game, going back to when he was coaching Mississippi State all those years ago. And again, last weekend, we were talking about a coin flip deciding number one and number two, but again, it ended up being chalk with these two teams making their way through the first couple rounds and getting to play each other on Championship Sunday.
Oh, yeah. In terms of the tournament as a whole, right? I mean, it's chalk because we got 1 versus 2, and we had a 2 versus 3 last night in LSU, Texas. But Oklahoma beating Kentucky was an interesting wrinkle, and I think that actually benefited the South Carolina team. If you're a Gamecock fan, you definitely would have rather seen Oklahoma like you did yesterday as opposed to Kentucky, just a better matchup. But, in terms of the entire tournament, 11 seed Florida winning a couple games was interesting. So, I mean, as chalky as it feels, we did have some twists and turns of this event here in Greenville. But, yeah, I mean, this is how it's supposed to be. These are the two best teams in the conference by far. I think LSU is a good team. They're not a great team. These are the two great teams that exist in your tournament right now. And when you have, the best bench in America with, Joyce Edwards and Malaysia Fulwiley, who could start anywhere in the country, and then the amount of talent you brought back from an undefeated championship year last year nationally, paired with the SEC Player of the Year, Madison Booker, a Hall of Fame head coach in Vic Schaefer, a bunch of transfer talent, including Kayla Oldacre, who came from Miami, and was the reason they beat you last time. there's a lot of great storylines here. And this is kind of just the culmination of an entire season's worth of two great teams playing great basketball.
Well, and it was not easy for both these teams to get here. No, you can look at the two finals for Carolina over the weekend, 84-63 to Vanderbilt on Friday, and then 93-75 to Oklahoma yesterday afternoon. But these two games were challenges. And going back to the game against Vanderbilt in the quarterfinals on Friday, South Carolina dominates the first half. Terrible third quarter, terrible first half of the fourth quarter, but then just completely locks in for those last couple of minutes and is able to pull away and get that 84-63 victory to set themselves up for that semifinal matchup with Oklahoma yesterday.
Yeah, the Vanderbilt game was weird, man. And like the first half, they were creating turnovers. They were scoring, with some efficiency once the bench unit came in. The starting five didn't play particularly well on Friday as an offensive unit. I think defensively they played fine, but offensively they were out of sync for large chunks of that game. I think Vanderbilt, too, did something defensively that I wouldn't be surprised to see Texas maybe do a little today, and that send two to the ball, blitz ball screens, make South Carolina's guards uncomfortable. And if they're going to try to live and die on that entry pass into the post, make that entry pass as hard as humanly possible. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we saw a lot of that in today's game with Texas, and them being maybe a little more aggressive defensively to try to speed South Carolina up, because they did get sped up against Vanderbilt, and that caused turnovers, that caused maybe not so great shot selection. And then when Michaela Blakes finally got things going in the third quarter, where she scored 2/3 of her points were in that second half, you saw Vanderbilt mount a comeback and cut it to 5. Didn't happen the same way yesterday. I think fatigue might have had a lot to do with that, fatigue and shot selection. But the Vanderbilt game was interesting just because you had to fight off a vicious comeback, and you had to have somebody take over late, and then closing time Chloe Kitts came out of nowhere and put up 25 and 10. And seemingly was able to get to the basket whenever you needed her to in a big moment.
Yeah, we've been waiting this weekend to see what the new nicknames were going to be. I came up with Edwards the Eliminator. You've got closing time, Chloe Kitts, and she was certainly on display on Friday there because, like you said, Vanderbilt cuts it to a 5-point game with 4:22 left. South Carolina shuts them down for those final 4.5 minutes, goes on a 16-0 run. Chloe Kitts gets 9 of her 25 points during that period of time, grabs another double-double as she gets 10 rebounds in the game, also has 2 assists as well. And like you said, she closed things out there to help South Carolina pick up that 21-point victory.
And it's not just that she made the shots to close it out. It's that the team had the supreme confidence to be able to run stuff for her. A lot of times when you get in these really close games, your average team has about 1 or 2 players that are your best players that you can go to and lean on and try to get you a bucket. This team has 5 players on the floor at all times who can score, and who for a lot of their careers were big time scorers. That's one of the best parts about this team too, is that on any given day, somebody can get 25. And when it came to, like, let's say the Kentucky game, it got really close. Kentucky got within a possession. And Dawn Staley, after the game, mentioned Tahina Powell being the player she trusted with the ball in her hands to be able to make the decision, to be the decision maker on the floor, the extension of the head coach. That Tahina Powell called a play for Mylasia Fulwiley to get her something going to the basket. She called her own number whenever they got in a horn set, and she used it to kind of break free and get an open three-pointer, which she nailed, and then that helped create the separation needed to beat Kentucky. You kind of have to feel it out in each game, and they felt it out in that Vanderbilt game to the point where when Vanderbilt cut it close, they knew Chloe was the hot hand. Chloe had the mismatch against Vanderbilt that, as great as Camille Pierre played for Vanderbilt, she really had no match for Chloe. So you saw at one point in the game, and Chloe even mentioned this post game, that Dawn called, the play 1-4, which Dawn kind of
she
Dawn
gave away the
fan
blueprint.
of Chloe giving away the play. However, in Chloe's defense, as someone who just was sitting across half court from them, as soon as I heard 1-4, I'm like, oh, that's going to be a ball screen for Chloe. A 1 set of screen for your 4. That's how a lot of teams do it. So it wasn't at least ultimate trade secret, but that was a funny moment. But yeah, you saw in that play too. That play was designed for Tahina Powell to set a screen for Chloe Kitts, and maybe if Vanderbilt switched, Chloe's on a smaller player, then you have a mouse in the house, go to work, get to the bucket, get fouled, get 2 points, whatever. And they were able to execute that perfectly. Chloe got downhill to the basket, scored. Rest is history. They got to the point in that game where they understood the pulse of what was going on well enough to know that Chloe Kitts needs to be touching the basketball right now. And Chloe certainly has the ability to close games out. You saw her do it against Michigan in the first game of the year. You saw her do it against Duke early on in the regular season as well. Closing time Chloe Kitts can be a real thing. And on Friday, they allowed it to be a real thing.
One of the big keys that we talked about on our local shows here on Friday was when you're taking on Vanderbilt, you have to take away Michaela Blake, of course, the SEC Freshman of the Year. She did end up with 20 points in the game on Friday. A lot of that damage done from the free throw line, as the combination of Breezy and Tessa did really good, holding her to just 33% from the field and only getting 15 shots out. We kind of talked about that magic number being key to trying to hold her under 20, and they did a good job defensively doing that on Friday.
Yeah. And here's the thing. One of the reasons that you won that game, I know we can look at closing time Chloe's performance in the fourth quarter to put the game away, but the reason that Vanderbilt's 20-plus point swing on you in the second half wasn't a death blow was because you had such a cushion in that first half. You do not get that first half cushion if Michaela Blake's is comfortable, right? Michaela Blake's was held to a very low scoring total in the first half of that game, and it was very inefficient. Like, here's the thing. You knew Michaela Blakes is going to get her shots off because that's what she's done against everybody. She is so good at creating separation off the bounce and being able to force defenses to allow her to shoot the ball. In the first half of that game, she only scored, only had 6, but was 2 for 8 shooting. She got 8 shots. She had 15 the entire time when they played just a few weeks ago. But making her a high volume shooter, taking away her driving lanes. One thing Bree Hall told me after the game was she wanted to take away her first step. You take away her first step towards the basket, you force it away from the basket. You'd rather Michaela Blake shoot a 17-foot fall away shot because her momentum is being pushed towards the perimeter, as opposed to her getting ahead of steam and jumping up towards the basket and being able to get easier buckets, less contested buckets. Bree Hall did a fantastic job of making Michaela Blake's uncomfortable. Raven Johnson as well in the second quarter made her uncomfortable enough to where she turned into a volume shooter that was inefficient. That stretch in the first half was as equally as important to winning the game as the stretch was in the last 4 minutes.
That's what happened on Friday. We'll take a look at what happened yesterday in the semifinals against Oklahoma and highlight some of the stars on the weekend so far as we get set for South Carolina and Texas, squaring off in the SEC tournament final for the women coming up today at 3 o'clock. We'll take you right into Brad Muller's pregame coverage coming up at 2:30 from Bond Scores Wellness Arena. It is Tyler Head and Elijah Campbell on your Sunday here on The Game. Yes, indeed. Welcome back in. It is the pregame show for today's edition of the SEC Women's Tournament between South Carolina and Texas, squaring off for the championship. Tyler Head live in the Herndon Chevrolet Studios here in Columbia. Elijah Campbell up there in Greenville at Bond Scores Wellness Arena, getting set for that matchup again. Coverage with Brad Muller on the network starting at 2:30 and leading you to 3 o'clock tip-off as South Carolina looks for their third straight SEC Women's Tournament championship. As we've been talking about, it's not been in the easiest road to get there these past couple days. And yesterday's game against Oklahoma in the semifinals almost kind of followed a similar type of path to the one on Friday against Vanderbilt, where South Carolina really dominated in that first half. Oklahoma able to make it interesting in the second half, but Carolina able to pull away down the stretch for the 93-75 victory over the Sooners, a team that they'd beaten by 41 points a little bit earlier on in the regular season. But anytime you play a team that plays as fast of a tempo as Oklahoma does, it can give you problems. And South Carolina, fortunately, was able to adjust to that as the game went along.
If anything, I think that's the style they play their best in. I think this offense is maximized whenever it gets out in transition and gets to run. So there's a differentiation here I'd like to make, and it's the two differences of speeding up, right? Against Vanderbilt, South Carolina in the half court was sped up, hurried, and rushed. That's what caused a lot of mistakes, especially in the second half. Against Oklahoma, they sped up. They were not being sped up. They sped up, and they were in control. There's one thing to be sped up and not be in control. There's one thing to speed up and being in control. And against Oklahoma, it allows them to do the latter compared to the former. They got to get out in transition. They got to play freely. They got to play against a team in Oklahoma that wants to play that blistering breakneck speed. Oklahoma has the number one pace of play in all of women's college basketball. They play almost 80 possessions a game. And in this game specifically, on March 8th, 2025, that benefited South Carolina significantly more because Oklahoma was on day 3 in the third game in 3 days. Not ideal for a team that wants to play that type of speed. It can be exhausting. There were some levels of fatigue, especially towards the end of each half. You saw some of that signs of fatigue, especially with Oklahoma's jump shots. You saw a lot of those transition jump shots. The one that didn't go in were a little short. The legs weren't there. The fatigue definitely hit Oklahoma to the point where it benefited South Carolina, because then when Mylasia Fulwiley got out in the break, they weren't going to stop her. That was the best possible matchup that South Carolina could have gotten. Not saying Kentucky would have beaten them, not by any means, because South Carolina is still the better team overall. But I think you got to sweat out yesterday a lot less because you played Oklahoma compared to what it would have been if you played Kentucky. I think that would have been a much tighter game. So that's the bracket gods helping you and doing something in your favor.
Well, and like you said, Oklahoma playing their third game in 3 days. When you try and play at that breakneck type speed, that's going to come back to bite you, especially for a team that's as sloppy with the ball as Oklahoma is. One of the worst in the entire country when it comes to turning it over. And as expected, they turned the ball over 16 times yesterday. South Carolina is able to capitalize with 22 points off those turnovers. As again, we know that aggressive defense is something that we expected out of South Carolina. Saw that yesterday. Another big reason why Carolina was able to pick up this victory.
Yeah, Carolina, man, like they're too good at playing the gaps. And that's one of the emphasis, I guess main emphasis that this team has had on the defensive side all year is playing your gap help and being able to jump passing lanes. That's one thing that after the LSU game early in the season, Raven Johnson kind of mentioned as the emphasis of that game was playing the gap help, making sure that you can protect the paint and still play your passing lane. And this team is so good at that. Like, that's the strength of this defense. They have rim protectors, but and they are really good on ball defensively, especially Raven and Bree. But they are fantastic at reading the eyes of someone who's making the pass and jumping a passing lane, getting a steal, and going the other way with it. And they put on a masterclass of it again yesterday. That's one thing that if you are going to beat South Carolina, you must have elite passers, efficient inside scorers, or great three-point shooters. UConn and Paige Beckers, elite passer and an elite scorer. And they have a couple of girls on the inside who are really efficient scorers. Against Texas, Madison Booker, an elite scorer, but was even held in check. Offensive rebounds, they were able to score once they got those second chance points. And Rory Harmon, probably the most underrated player on this Texas team, hard to underrate somebody who even gets as much acclaim as she does, is a really good passer. And UCLA has like 3 really good passers and playmakers on that team. That's what it takes to beat a South Carolina. And Oklahoma didn't have it. Vanderbilt had it a little bit. You have to be an elite passing team just because the Gamecocks are so good at playing off the ball.
Well, and again, much like on Friday when it came to taking away Michaela Blake's, Carolina did that perfectly yesterday with Reagan Beers, again, one of the best players in the SEC, held only 7 points and held between, 7:23 to go in the first and 5:27 to go in the game in the fourth quarter without a single point. And you got Sanaya Fagan and Miriam Dowda, a big part of why she was held in check during that entire game.
Yeah, Miriam Dowda minutes, man. You won the Miriam Dowda minutes. Not only did you get your Miriam Dowda minutes, you got the best Miriam Dowda minutes you could have possibly imagined. And she played phenomenal yesterday, especially when it came to holding position against someone like Reagan Beers, who wider frame, definitely hard to move off that block, and it got physical down there. I mean, they're like when Sanaya and Miriam were going toe to toe with Reagan Beers down the block and fighting for position, those were capital F fights for position on the block. And when Reagan Beers, whenever she caught the ball and would be in scoring position, she still never had a clean look to the basket. She caught the ball, within 4 feet of the rim a few times, but even when she did, she never had a clean look at the basket. And that's why she missed as many bunnies as she did, is because they were so contested. And I think some of that can be fatigue, but at the same time, Miriam's is very long. She has a very long wingspan. She can alter shots. If she doesn't get pushed off the block, she will alter shots. And she did a phenomenal job of altering shots yesterday against Oklahoma. Made a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Dowd in those 12 minutes had 5 points, 3 steals, 2 rebounds, and 1 block as well. Again, a young player that's coming along nicely for South Carolina. And as we get set for the third game of the weekend for the Gamecocks, it's really kind of hard to nail down exactly who the one MVP for this team's been so far. You have Full Wiley, Kitts, and Edwards all with over 30 points. Edwards with 21 yesterday to lead the way for South Carolina. Of course, Kitts had her double-double on Friday. She's gotten 14 points or 14 rebounds so far this weekend. Full Wiley and Edwards each with 9 rebounds apiece. Obviously, Full Wiley's defense speaks for itself. 6 steals on the weekend so far. Kitts had 3 on her own. Her and Edwards have both had a block on the weekend as well. And then you have between Hall, Tessa, and Dowda, that defense we talked about, taking away Blake's, taking away Reagan Beers, is all why this team is back in the championship once again today.
That's when they're at their best, right? Like, that's my favorite part about this team the last couple of years, is that they have such a collection of talent, and the fun part about watching them is seeing who fills in roles, right? Like, all of these players on this team right now, everyone on this roster could go to another Power 4 school and be the leading scorer. They choose not to, so they can all play together and work towards a common goal. Like, you can't tell me Malaysia Full Wiley can't go to Indiana right now and be first team All Big Ten, or be the Big Ten Player of the Year, even with a conference with Juju Watkins and Lauren Betts in it. Like, she could still go there and seriously contend for Big Ten of the Year. You can't tell me Tessa Johnson, can't go home to Minnesota and be a first team All Big Ten player. You can't, like, and score 20 a game. Like, that's the best part about this team. And this week, the roles have been Joyce and Chloe trying to establish post position inside, getting buckets that way, because that's kind of your easy button on offense, is dumping the ball into the post, letting those two ladies go to work. And then Malaysia Full Wiley getting out on the break and being a human highlight reel, especially in that Oklahoma game, because she plays her best in transition. Every time they play Oklahoma, I'm like, this is a perfect Malaysia Full Wiley game. We might see some magic happen. And then with you, like you mentioned with the steals too, maybe the coolest play that we've seen in this tournament so far is her picking someone's pocket against Vanderbilt with less than 5 seconds to go in the quarter. Pulls up from 3, drills it.
Like, she almost hit one yesterday as well.
Dude, oh my! I was sitting there next to Noah Chass from ABC Columbia, and I was saying, if she would have made that, there would be no roof in this building right now. It would have been blown off. Like, I mean, you could see, because she was on my side of the floor. She, like, doesn't pick up her dribble. She picks her head up though, looks at the clock, sees that there's 4 seconds left. Normally, someone that's about 3 feet behind the 3-point line then makes their decision to dribble and pull up and shoot. She still said, no, I got time.
Yeah.
Got to the rim, got the shot off, just a mere feet away from the basket, and it almost went in. But an absolute lightning rod of a player, man.
It is all those reps from those days when she was in her driveway that they love to replay during games when talking about her. And obviously they've worked out pretty well because, again, she's nailed those quite a few times. And again, almost did it once again yesterday. We've talked about what's happened so far this weekend. Now it's time to look back at what happened in these past couple matchups between South Carolina and Texas. Split the regular season series one apiece. And again, the rubber match coming up today at the top of the 3 o'clock hour. We got 30 more minutes here as we lead you right into pregame coverage with Brad Muller on the network, Tyler Head, and Elijah Campbell getting you set for the championship of the 2025 SEC Women's Basketball Tournament on your Sunday on the Game.
I mean, it's both. It's both. But I would say with our team, they seem to really focus in when there's a number beside our opponent. They practice a little better. They're more focused. They talk less. I mean, and then I mean they knew the intangibles of this game would play a huge role in us winning or losing. And those intangibles are, those 50-50 balls. The intangibles are when your man is beating you, the trust, the help, and stay in the play and not give up on anything. I think it's ingrained in them to do that from a want to win, and it's ingrained in them through our coaching staff.
And welcome back into 107.5, the game's pregame coverage of South Carolina and Texas squaring off in the final of the SEC Women's Tournament for 2025. Again, that game coming up for you at 3 o'clock. Brad Muller's going to be on the call for network coverage at pregame starting at the bottom of the hour, which will take you right into what you just heard. There was Dawn Staley back on January the 12th, where number 5 Texas came into Colonial Life Arena and South Carolina handled them 67-50. Elijah, in a game that you want to talk about a defensive performance, that might have been one for the ages, holding the mighty Longhorns to just 28% from the field and basically neutralizing Madison Booker to next to nothing in that game.
Oh, they had the Longhorns in jail, man. That was an aggressive defensive performance. And one of the more impressive ones you will see from this team. Look, very few times this year has a team come into Colonial Life Arena against this Gamecock team and gone for over a point per possession. That was not going to be the case in this game right here. The most important thing, though, the biggest takeaway was that Bree Hall personally had Madison Booker, the SEC Player of the Year, in jail that afternoon, all right? I can't remember the point total, but it was 3. I do know she was 3 of 19 shooting and was
she
only
was held to
one
7
for about her
points
first
in that
11.
game.
Yeah, it was like about 1 for her first 11 or 12, but 3 of 19 was the final. 3 makes 19 attempts for the SEC Player of the Year. Some of those were near the basket, but they were all contested near the basket. That's another thing that's a common theme with this team, is that some teams will get shots near the basket against them, but they're always going to be greeted with length and arms and hands and altering your shot. And Madison Booker for an entire game had her shot altered. She didn't get to the paint a ton. It happened a couple times, but she also, one of those players who you could tell that Bree studied Madison Booker pretty intensively or extensively, because what Madison Booker loves to do is get, dribbling downhill, do that little step back, pull up mid-range jumper. She's killed teams with that this year. Had it going last night against LSU. She's got a really good pull-up jumper, and she's so long that she can get her shots off over anybody, right? Regardless of length. Bree Hall put on a masterclass on how to keep Madison Booker out of the paint and make those 8, 9, 10 fall-away jumpers or pull-up jumpers that she shoots contested, and none of them were going in. That was, if we were to rank defensive performances this year by this Gamecock team or individual Gamecock players, Bree Hall against Madison Booker on that day in Colonial Life Arena, number 1 on the list.
Well, and I think it's also significant to point out that, that defensive performance was even more impressive considering the fact the week before is when you lost Ashlyn Watkins for the season. And obviously, we know what her presence on defense for this team is. The question became of, okay, who's going to step up and who's going to make some of those defensive plays that she was making? While it's not necessarily one player that's done that throughout the entire season since she's been out, it's been several players stepping up. You mentioned Bree Hall. Sanaya Fagan had a really big game that day with 6 blocks in the game. And it's just kind of been rotating through different girls game in and game out and who kind of steps up in that absence of Ashlyn Watkins, to the point, as great of a player as Ashlyn Watkins is, you don't talk about it every single game that she's not there anymore because everybody else is playing so well on defense.
Yeah, and that's everybody has stepped up. That game specifically for Sanaya, I'm glad you mentioned the 6 blocks, because that goes hand in hand with the clip that we just heard coming back from break, right? Dawn said, like, part of this defensive output was created by, even if you do get beaten off the dribble, which just happens in basketball, even your best defenders can get taken off the dribble in a certain situation. That's just the game. But trusting that if you do get taken off the dribble, that whoever's behind you is going to step up and be able to help you out. And then if you have to shift accordingly, shift and rotate accordingly. In that game, Sanaya Fagan was the eraser. Any mistakes that were made at the perimeter or any mistakes that were made on the other block, Sanaya Fagan was rotating over and blocking shots. She was the perfect eraser for the Gamecocks in that game, because even if you made a mistake somewhere 15 feet away from the basket, that was being nullified because Sanaya Fagan had your back. And that was the perfect game for exactly what Don was saying in that clip after the first Texas game, is that part of being great defensively is 5 players defending as almost one cohesive unit. Best example of that is Sanaya Fagan being able to block shots, help side, if someone does get beat off the dribble. And then when this team's doing that, they're rotating so well, as good as they do guarding on the perimeter, it makes them just that much harder to score on.
That was game number 1, again, back in early January. South Carolina at number 2 at that point in time, taking down the number 5 team in Texas. They traveled to Austin on Super Bowl Sunday a little over a month ago for round number 2. Unfortunately, South Carolina came up on the losing side of that one, 67-62, in a game that's Don Staley described as just being disrupted the entire time.
I mean, they disrupted us. I mean, we worked on some things that we could do, to relieve the pressure, but didn't work. I think it's a lot easier when you're practicing and you're not in this environment and it's loud and you can't hear what the play call is. Then you got to improvise a little bit. I thought they did a better job improvising and running their sets. We couldn't disrupt them as much as we disrupted them at our play. So, they returned the favor.
And that was a 66-62 loss in Austin, Texas, right at a month ago on Super Bowl Sunday. The numbers certainly bear out that way. Texas shoots 44% from the field, wins the rebounding battle 42-45 in a game that Carolina was never really out of because it was tight and nip and tuck the entire time, but you never felt like they were able to gain control of that game as Texas kind of carried it throughout the entire time.
It felt like every time South Carolina hit a big shot, and I know there were a couple of really big baskets made in that second half, you felt they were back in it. You're like, okay, this is where they take over, right? We've seen this before. They struggle for a couple of quarters. They get back in it. This is where they take over. But Texas was the closer. Kayla Oldacre was one of the closers because she, in that second half, dominated the glass. Every time that South Carolina made a big bucket, and it's like, okay, you get a stop, you have a chance to get, to turn things around, take the lead on the next possession. And they would do a great job in the first 25 seconds of the shot clock, making Texas shoot a tough shot. There was one issue. No one could keep Kayla Oldacre off the glass. And that made a world of difference. Texas on second chance points, Texas on the inside, drawing fouls too. Madison Booker drew a couple fouls close to the rim as well in closing time of that game. Managed the physicality better. I think that was the biggest takeaway that I had from game 1 to game 2, was that in game 2, Texas was more of the physical aggressor, especially in crunch time. And they were not afraid of contact. And if anything, they sought it out. Madison Booker, the biggest thing that she did differently in game 2 compared to game 1 is she was seeking out contact and did a significantly better job of getting herself to the free throw line, where at a couple times this game, she really helped put it on ice.
Yeah, and with a great player like that, obviously winning the SEC Player of the Year, it's going to be hard to stop her twice. She got 20 points in that second game, going 7 of 22 from the field. And I think a lot of it certainly had to do with kind of the environment that you're playing in. Obviously, going into Texas, being one of the better programs in women's basketball over the years is not an easy thing to do. That obviously ended South Carolina's long win streak in the SEC. But now today we get set for them to take each other on a neutral floor, which we'll get to in just a moment. But again, when you kind of look at how this series has been, there's a reason it came down to a coin flip, because these teams are so evenly matched, and we are so thrilled to see what's going to be happening later on this afternoon.
Oh, yeah. And Texas provides just such an opportunity. They're the number 1 team in the country right now for a reason. They have star power, a go-to scorer, which is Madison Booker. They have incredible interior defense and rebounding. They got great size with Jones and Oldacre. Those two gobble up rebounds, right? And they rarely play on the floor at the same time. So you're dealing with one or the other throughout the entirety of a 40-minute game. Rory Harmon might be one of the best non-Carolina on-ball defenders in the SEC. It helps that Carolina's got like 2 of the best on-ball defenders in the Southeastern Conference, but Harmon is up there in that same class with Raven Johnson and Bree Hall. And that's a player, too, that has played a lot of college basketball. You have a mix of experience. You have a mix of just raw, incredible talent and leadership in coaching. Like, Vic Schaefer helped a lot of conducting a game plan and knowing, like, hey, look, even if Madison's not making shots, she still needs to shoot the ball 20-plus times. We have a rebounding advantage. And if you look into this game today, I still say Texas has a rebounding advantage and a physicality advantage down low. How much they're able to use it today could determine whether or not they win the round 3 of this matchup. South Carolina's got advantages in other ways, but that's what makes a game like this so unique. Like last year in the SEC title game against LSU, it's strength versus strength. You got great scoring guards, great passing guards, and a dominant big, and that was the one-on-one matchup. Camila Cardoso and Angel Reese was absolute box office last year. This year, it's 2 teams that get their buckets a little differently than another. One relies a lot more on one player to conduct a lot of the offense, but has other players that are capable. The other, in South Carolina, having anybody be able to go off for 20-plus on a given night. Texas has an advantage maybe on the boards and some of the physicality down low. South Carolina has an advantage when it comes to getting out in the break and running in transition and playing up-tempo basketball. It's more of a true clash this year in the SEC title game than it was last year in the SEC title game.
We'll take a look at all the keys. I'll let you hear from Vic Schaefer as he gets set to take on South Carolina for the 3rd time this season. That's coming up next. It is the local pregame here on 107.5 The Game. Tyler Head and Elijah Campbell getting you set for the SEC Women's Tournament Championship coming up at 3 o'clock right here on The Game. Welcome back in. It is your local 107.5 The Game pregame show. Tyler Head and Elijah Campbell getting you set for the Gamecocks and the Longhorns up at Bon Scores Wellness Arena in Greenville for the SEC Women's Tournament Final. Again, these two teams had a coin flip for the seeding last week, and they both made their way through the first couple rounds to square off for a third time this season in the conference championship game. Obviously, this is the first year for Texas being in the SEC, but Vic Schaefer, no stranger to this championship game as he's been here for prior times. And he talked about yesterday after their victory over LSU last night on the matchup with South Carolina for a third time this season.
For sure. I mean, it's a home game. Obviously, there'll be a great crowd tomorrow, and it'll be a great environment, for college basketball. There'll be a lot of people hollering for them. But we've got a great Longhorn contingent here. I'm really proud of our fans that have traveled. And but it is, I think more than that, that's certainly a part of it, but you're playing a great team. I mean, they've been number one this year. They've been number one last year. They've been number one the year before. So they're, obviously a really good team. We know what happened the first time. We know what it took the second time to compete and win that game. And so I do believe in that our kids understand that. And again, we're way different than we were back that first time we played in Columbia. So it's a great opportunity. It's how I look at it. I mean, it is what it is. So we need to embrace it and want to be in that, in that arena. I mean, that to me is the whole thing. You got to want to be in that arena. Look, you come to Texas to play the best. And so tomorrow we're going to play one of the best teams in the country. And so we're going to need to keep continuing to do what we do and play the way we play. And, we'll see what happens.
Again, this is the championship match we all expected, all we're hoping for, because, again, these are the two best teams in the SEC, and you got to determine who's the best in a three-game set, right? You got one on the road, South Carolina got the one here at home. Texas got the one on the road in Austin, and like you said, it is maybe kind of a quasi-home game for South Carolina being only a couple hours up the road there in Greenville, but a neutral site nonetheless. And it sounds like, from what he said there, and you can attest to this, sounds like a pretty good contingent of burnt orange out there in Greenville as well.
Better than I pictured. Better than I predicted, I should say. I didn't think they would have as many as they do. I mean, I'm looking at the arena right now, and I see a few Texas fans heading on in, but they brought a lot more than I anticipated. However, that being said, and the props that I give them for being able to bring a cheering contingency here to Greenville, this place is going to be 85% South Carolina fans, and it's going to get loud, and it gets loud every time they score a bucket. Like LSU last year for the title game brought a ton of fans that maybe made up only 25% of the crowd, right? I mean, this is the SEC championship or SEC tournament becomes kind of the South Carolina Invitational, as it should be right now, because of how this team has run this league. It makes it a lot harder. This would be incredibly impressive. I do think the winner of this game is going to be the overall number one seed in the NCAA tournament. But man, if Texas wins in this environment, that speaks pretty strongly to the mental fortitude that team has, because it's going to be hostile for them.
And, of course, no surprise, the top of the scouting report, once again, going to be Madison Booker, who, again, South Carolina was able to stifle in game number one, got more of hers in game number two. And going back to last night's matchup when they took on LSU in a tough semifinal, she once again took the game over, scoring 25 points and grabbing 6 rebounds as well.
Yeah, and that's the thing with Madison Booker is she is such a gifted 3-level scorer that you're not going to stop her from getting looks. She's good. She's good at creating her own shot, and she's good at catching off the pass and shooting from there. You got to make sure every single one of those, whether it's 19 attempts like in the first meeting or the 22 in the second, that you make them difficult. Like it's all about tinkering with the degree of shot quality. And this is where Bree Hall and Raven Johnson are going to be two of the more important players. I know Madison's got a couple inches on Raven, but Raven is such a good on-ball defender. I wouldn't be surprised if she's part of the rotation, that you see Breonna in the first half. Maybe early in the second, you might see Raven. Maybe if you just throw a bunch of different bodies at Madison the way you did at Caitlin Clark in the national championship game last year, that maybe you can continue to wear her down and make her shoot inefficient jump shots. That's the big thing. And I don't expect Madison Booker to make over 55% of her shots in the field. I don't see that. I think she'll be a volume shooter again. The big difference, can you keep Texas from second chance points? That's going to be that is probably going to be the biggest hurdle for the Gamecocks in this game.
Well, and it seems like rebounds are going to tell the story of this. The two best defenses in all the SEC and two of the best rebounding teams, both teams averaging over 40 rebounds a game. You talked about Kayla Oldacre, who's got a ton of rebounds in her 2 games against South Carolina, including a ridiculous amount in game number 1 that South Carolina was still able to win that game regardless. But a lot of stuff going to be happening off the boards today, and kind of one of those things with who wins the rebounding battle may end up walking away with the trophy at the end of the day.
Very well could. And here's the thing, too, about the first game. It was a blowout. It wasn't very competitive for most of the game. But if Kayla Oldacre and Texas made even 40% of their shots near the rim, it's a 1-possession game in the fourth quarter at some point. It would then mirror what we saw in Austin. They shot so poorly around the rim, and South Carolina's size and athleticism affected them way more at CLA than it did at Moody in Austin. I don't know what the venue change is going to be there, but I expect Texas to have a bit of a rebounding edge. You just got to make sure that those rebounds don't end up turning into second chance points if that is to happen. Now, if South Carolina is able to control the defensive glass, they're going to win this game by 10. I firmly believe that. Texas is a good scoring team. They're not as efficient of a shooting team as maybe some of the other elite college basketball teams in America are right now.
And, you know, we've talked a lot this week about the silliness of that coin flip last week with Greg Sankey to give South Carolina the number 1 seed. And I certainly hope we're going to go through some different processes to determine how we do that in the years going forward. But regardless,
God, please.
South Carolina won that coin flip. And, you know, as insignificant as a couple of hours may seem, Texas and LSU did not wrap up until about 9 o'clock last night. Obviously, South Carolina got done a little bit earlier on in the afternoon with that win over Oklahoma. So they do come into this game with a little bit more rest than the Longhorns do, which, again, benefit from being the number 1 seed. We'll see if that plays out, especially at the beginning of the game. We've seen South Carolina get off to some very slow starts this year that have been to their detriment at times. They can get off to a better start than Texas today in that first quarter, in that first half. That could go a long way in them winning this game this afternoon.
My only thing is with this building, in the last 2 seasons of covering this event, I have seen the South Carolina Gamecocks blow 20-plus point leads and get them down to either 5 or the other team take the lead with the Tennessee game last year. So I kind of felt like that yesterday, right? When Oklahoma hit a couple threes back to back to back, and then it's like, oh, wow, I guess no lead is safe in this building. And then, of course, Carolina took care of business. It didn't matter anyway. But we've seen in this building a couple times that the South Carolina team go up 20-plus and have to fight off a feverish comeback. Now, any game you say, Elijah, do you take 20 points to start the game or not? I'm taking the 20-point lead to start the game.
Yeah.
But you're going to need everything, right? The totality of this matchup is going to be the deciding factor. It won't be one during one specific 5 or 6 minute stretch. It's going to be a war of attrition, and you got to be able to be consistent throughout. And if South Carolina can get that crowd invested early, then maybe you can rattle. Maybe you can channel a home court advantage that a quote, air quote, neutral site wouldn't normally provide.
Yeah, well, and in years past, you've been out there too. Greenville is Columbia North. And again, like you said, it's going to be a heavy contingent of Garnet there to combat what is a pretty probably well-traveled group of folks there in the Burn Orange. But again, the fams travel. Dawn Staley always makes it a point to tell them how much she appreciates that. And this should be on full display today. And again, if the past 2 matchups been any indication, there is something to home court advantage, which hopefully South Carolina has some semblance of later on this afternoon.
Oh yeah, and they will. I mean, that's my favorite thing about this tournament is how loud South Carolina fans get in there. Like it's a building that's got solid acoustics anyway, and it feels louder than it actually is at times. But like for instance, when Elijah Fulwiley hit that buzzer-beating 3 at the first quarter against Vanderbilt, the place was maybe 75% full, but you wouldn't been able to tell there was an empty seat at all in that arena, right? And then yesterday, the entire time, the energy was there. Like there's going to be energy in that building. You know, you might not need caffeine to be able to get amped for this game because you're going to be able to feel that energy just be very palpable on the floor. That's one thing that a lot of neutral site big conference tournaments don't have, is that type of energy. They have it here in Greenville, and they have it in droves.
Yeah, and look, we ran through some of the numbers earlier of what some of these women have done so far this weekend. Again, Full Wiley, Kitts, and Edwards already have 30-plus points on the weekend. It's, as cliche as it sounds, it's going to take all of your best players going out there and having their best version of a game to be able to beat this Texas team. Because, again, you're going to talk about Booker, you're going to talk about Old Acre. They're going to go out there and obviously be tough to deal with over the course of 40 minutes. And, again, you're going to have to put your best foot forward if you want to beat this team that, again, has gotten the better of you the last time you saw them.
Yeah, absolutely. And my X factor here is because you mentioned the 3 Gamecock players with over 30 in this tournament so far between Chloe, Joyce, Mylasia. I think the player that will have the most to do with South Carolina winning or losing this game becomes Raven Johnson. And none of it has to do with scoring the basketball. She is going to have a A+ game defensively. One of the reasons that, Madison Booker might get a lot of high-quality shots is because Rory Harmon would do a really good job getting her the ball. Guarding Rory Harmon is as equally as important as guarding Madison Booker. I think Raven Johnson's going to revel in that matchup. Those Harmon and Johnson play very similar to each other. That's going to be a fun game within the game to watch. I think she needs to win that. I think she needs to get some steals. And yesterday, when talking about the physicality down low, she told me that, look, before the game, I knew Beers was going to be a lot to handle, and she grabs a lot of offensive rebounds. So I put a higher emphasis on myself to tap the ball out and get offensive boards and help the bigs get boards. She's going to need to do that today. And if she does that well, South Carolina wins.
A little over 2 minutes away from getting you out to Brad Muller. She's going to take over pregame coverage for the network, leading right up to tip-off at 3 o'clock. When this game is done, when 40 minutes are in the books, roughly around 5 o'clock, who's going to be holding the SEC Women's Tournament Championship for 2025? And what's that scoreboard going to look like, Elijah?
I think South Carolina is going to get the contributions from their scores and Raven Johnson enough. They win 72-66, and South Carolina will be the number 1 overall 1 seed going into the NCAA tournament.
You think one team's actually going to be able to get to 70 points this time?
I think we're going to see a lot of free throws. Yeah.
Okay.
I think we're going to call it pretty tight. I just have a feeling. That's a gut feeling. That's the gut one right there.
Yeah, look, I think it's going to be tight all the way down the stretch. Again, defense, these two of the best defenses in the SEC. I'm going to go a little bit lower. I'm going to go South Carolina 64, Texas 60. But you talk about those free throws. I feel like that's something we're going to be talking about when this is all said and done, is which team was able to be better at the free throw line in terms of who ends up winning, especially as you get more physical later on in that second half.
Yep, and I have a feeling, too, maybe it's the location. Maybe it's the peer pressure from everybody that's in the building that South Carolina can maybe draw a little bit of a friendlier whistle, but I think that's going to be a heavy emphasis. Texas got in foul trouble against Ole Miss in that first quarterfinal game, and it made things a little more uncomfortable. LSU kind of, pulled them in the muck with them a little bit last night. I think that made things a little more difficult. I think South Carolina, in a physicality standpoint, will be able to get to the line a lot if they're aggressive with the ball.
Well, it's going to be fun to see. And, hey, these teams could match up a 4th time in the NCAA tournament. We'll certainly have to see what happens there. But appreciate you guys tuning in as we've been getting you set for South Carolina and Texas taking each other on in the SEC Women's Tournament Final. Coming up 3 o'clock, we're about to throw things out to Brad Muller for network coverage out there at Bond Scores Wellness Arena in just a moment. For Elijah Campbell, I'm Tyler Head. This has been the 107.5 The Game pregame show on your Sunday here on The Game.